part of what we want to talk about is what kind of freedom do you have as teachers? Some of y'all are in social studies, some of you are in English. What does this mean for our students? What does ethnic studies look like in English? What does ethnic studies look like in world history? How do you get ready for an APUSH exam using ethnic studies, et cetera, et cetera? So this is sort of an intro. This is the transition that we want to make in this next section. Thank you, Futa. Right there is the collection. And so we're going to be using the East Austin Murals collection sort of as an example today to start thinking about and playing around with creating your own lessons for murals, but also thinking about what does ethnic studies mean to me. It is much more than a class, right? It is certainly a perspective. And so probably the first thing I'm going to want to ask y'all to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put a Jamboard, and I'm going to start, we can start in many, many places with ethnic studies. I'm going to start with cultures because there's so many interesting ways we can enter with cultures into ethnic studies. And so in the Jamboard, what I want you to do is, it is basically a KWL chart. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my Jamboard. I want to share this screen. I want to share my, here we go. Here's the Jamboard. So if you're getting towards the Jamboard, the main thing I want to focus on here is that you see that there are multiple pages, right? The K is right here. What do you know for teaching cultures? And so if you've never used a Jamboard before, wait, first people can show me are seeing the Jamboard. I always need to start with that. Can you see that? Yeah, we're good, right? You can get the sticky notes right there. You type in the sticky notes, and then you can change colors depending on what you want to do. You press save, and the Jamboard will appear right there on the page. Once you're done with what I know, you go up here to the next page because there we go. And this is what do I want to know. So once again, just click on a sticky note. If you want to do orange to keep it in, but you don't have to, type it in, put it in there. So let's give us 2 to 5 minutes on allowing you to write those two ideas. What do we know? How do we teach cultures to our students? What are cultures? What are different kinds of cultures? What does cultures have to do with ethnic studies? So it's not just cultures itself, but everything that you want to know about cultures. Any questions or issues in getting to the Jamboard? Notice that question. Do we need to teach cultures differently to BIPOC students than to white students, to middle class students, to working class students? So different questions you can ask yourself. Let's make this go ahead and give you a few seconds, and I'll let you move it yourself. As you start moving it around, you may see some themes. Like if you see someone that's written something similar, you may want to locate it next to those themes. That's a nice little scaffold to use for the students. So once you finish on page 1, let's go on to page 2. What do you want to learn about culture? About teaching culture? So I'm seeing lots of wonderful stuff. I see y'all moving it around. I'm starting to see people move over here. Yeah, resize it, and I can certainly see that makes it easier to read. If you need to use more than one sticky, that's fine. Oh, funny, already by 7 or 8. You already got one of the themes that I'm looking forward to. We have 6 hours. We cannot cover all of ethnic studies in 6 hours. So one of our hopes is to self-organize. What we find all over the country is ethnic studies study groups. So part of the question that we're already asking people is, are there people who would be interested in ethnic studies high school group? We find that has generally been one of the most important tools in ethnic studies is teachers self-organizing themselves. I think one of the starting things about ethnic studies is there are no experts, right? We are experts in our own experience. We want the students to become experts of their own experience. So I'm going to give about Oof, about one more minute, because we are getting lots of great questions. So I'm going to start, just because of time, to start reading aloud some of the cultural appreciation. Oh, you even use the marker tool. Nice. So yeah, you can see that with the Jamboard. You can use other virtual tours as we finish this. So in English class, I feel like I have to share with kids about access to power and read first counts. So integrating that into English is very important. Biases and state curriculum. So state curriculum versus ethnic studies, very important. Pre-work must be done. Yes, we always talk about that. Before we would talk about those first 2 weeks of building relationships with students, there needs to be a lot of pre-work as you get to know your students. But what is that pre-work that needs to be done? So understanding their own identity, privilege, vantage point, class created, agreed upon norms. And right there it is, right? How do we get our students to talk about ethnic studies in respectful ways? Are they allowed to make mistakes? Are we allowed to make mistakes in ethnic studies? Some of the questions that we have, engaging ways to teach. And we know that is probably schools, right? Schools is the prisons in one sense, but we also know how we teach tends to be very prison-like. How can we push against that? And then I think interactive, engaging is some of the ways. So certainly these are some examples. In the end, though, when it comes to strategies, I think that's where the group really comes into, but we're certainly the arts-based instruction, this Jamboard, we're going to be certainly talking about that. It's ideally 5 minutes of us talking, 15 minutes of the students talking. It needs to be student-student interaction if the students are going to learn. Students will not learn if they are not writing, if they are not speaking. Creating meaningful products in the virtual environment. There we go. Proficiency in culturally sustaining pedagogies, most definitely. We see the distinctions as students certainly move away from their family cultures, move away from their peer cultures. For multiple cultures, you feel that they're dying slowly inside. But we also want to talk about how can we create positive identities of love and caring in our community. So I'm going to switch over. These are wonderful. We're going to return to these. Thank you for asking these questions, for being reflective, for thinking about this carefully. This is absolutely wonderful. So this is the building background. We always know this is always good to begin. This is where spend as little time as possible and focus on getting the kids to reflect, think, transition into your class because they've just come from math class. They're just coming in and you're creating that safe space. But there's another piece. We talk about those build student-student relationships. What about our student-teacher relationships? And you've already mentioned this quite a bit. As teachers, we are in a very interesting place. We're in a spot between oppressors and oppressed. And so what does that have to do with ethnic studies? So I want to take about a little space back and first think about, there are many, many definitions of ethnic studies. But for me, what has been so strong for ethnic studies throughout my career is really, this is one of the few spaces for us to talk about and think about how oppressed cultures have existed, have resisted, and our relationship with oppressed cultures within the United States. So this basically, what it does is one of the few places where I can put oppression center stage, whether it is as a thematic unit in my ESL course, where we see this within literacy instruction, or within the ethnic studies course myself that I teach. So the question that I'm going to be able, that we're going to ask, yes, socio-emotional learning very much is important. That I want us to think is first, we need to first sort of connect to ourselves as oppressed. So question everybody, and then this is where I tell people, get out your little chatting fingers, get ready, do your chatting exercises with your fingers, and we're just going to chat away. Are you oppressed as teachers? So what should be happening very quickly there is hell yes, right? Yes, 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 yes. I only see 3 Indeed. 4, please, please. We need to first claim that teaching is a very oppressive environment for many of us. How are we oppressed as teachers? How are we oppressed as teachers? So one of the first things I think of is work environment. Do you have a liberating work environment? As a teacher, I do not have too much time to eat. Ooh, let's talk about the past year. Have you been oppressed in the past year? Pay equity. My goodness. So most definitely financial. What about just in terms, yeah, being valued by society? What about in terms of knowledge production? I know this starts getting kind of iffy, but do you have the freedom to create curriculum that is liberating for yourself and for your students? Oh my goodness, Zoom fatigue. Yeah, I was, and I think that is one of the questions that y'all currently ask is how do we balance what TA is asking? Yeah, remember when we had the orthodontist in charge of the TEA? He was the one that was saying, make sure to teach all religion and keep ethnic studies out of the classroom, because as an orthodontist, it's really important that you, so that was someone who wrote in the chat that sometimes you wonder about the teaching experience of the people who are in charge. So now let's move on. Are we oppressors? So yeah, keep on going, keep on finishing, but this is how I do my chats, right? It's like, it's got to be interactive. The next step, keep on reading those. Are we oppressors? And so we most definitely should just as quickly be say yes, 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 definitely. This is why we're. How are we oppressors? As teachers. We're put in that very difficult situation. We're in the classroom. We are gatekeepers. No matter where we are, whether we are in the AP courses, whether on remedial courses, ESL, right? This wonderful point you made that education is supposed to be liberation. Literacy is supposed to be liberation. And this is where we start talking about unconscious bias, right? All the things that we don't know about. How much material and content do we have to create by tomorrow? It is impossible. The job that we do is impossible. I always think about teachers in other countries, i.e. Japan, Singapore, Finland, work half the day and spend half the day with preparation. Yes, please respond to each other. This is what the chat is for. You're not responding to me. It is an ongoing dialogue. So wonderful way of responding to each other, saying, yes, this is what I feel. So we are both oppressors and oppressed, right? This is one of the first things that we need to tell our first year teachers. This can be 24/7. If you are a 24/7 teacher, you're going to burn yourself out and you're going to be out of the career in under 3 years. You have to set limits. The first person you have to take care of yourself is yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of your students. Please take bathroom breaks, right? Please eat. But the point of all this is that part of our job, and something that we do a lot within ethnic studies, is talk about how is it that we are constantly being oppressed, and how is it that we oppress our students, because we believe that the more that we know about how the system is destroying us and providing opportunities for our students, the better that we can serve our students. Wonderful. Keep on going. Keep on going. So today, what we're going to talk about is center this idea of ethnic studies as focusing on the role of oppression, but also focusing on, if we talk about oppression, then we can talk about liberation. I didn't think I would be able to start here, but after hearing all of y'all, it's really, really exciting to be able to work with this group of educators. Yeah, y'all are a good bunch. This is going to be great. With a basic idea is that our job is not to tell students who they are, what cultures are, what the United States is, but to facilitate their own exploration. And it is in the facilitation of understanding their own experiences that students are in the process of liberation, both of themselves, their peers, and ourselves. So often our students liberate us. And so we will be going about this particular method. We've translated the language experience approach. How many people know language experience approach? It's an old system, but what we've been working on, I work with a group of elementary educators. We've been focusing on a critical language experience approach. And basically what this has done is it takes, what we say is that language has to be in action, has to be engaged. And then how do we transform experiences with our students into reflective learning? So we think of it as spiral content, in which we introduce academic content, for instance, maybe familial cultural practices, and then somehow we have the students sensorily, and this is where art is so nice, but it can be field trips, service learning, the games that we just did with the Loteria, different ways to experience that content. So we could share family cultures through family games, just like the Loteria. But once they're done, we need to do the second half of the critical language experience approach, which is dialogue and reflect. So we ask students to critically analyze what has been going on for themselves, and then to share it among each other, because we ask them to really, really, really reflect on their own experience. And then finally, they write and share with others what this has to do with the content. And as a spiral curriculum, we go in circles, getting them to think about this. So before we get into this, let's have a quick, once again, get out your chatting. What are cultures? Let's talk about many definitions of cultures. What I want to certainly focus on is dynamic cultures. We'll use this to go into murals and have conversations about cultural symbols. So what I want to sort of focus on with definitions of cultures is groups of people who share common values and beliefs, behaviors, and language, with the idea that we are part of many cultures. For the students, what I always focus on, you have family cultures and you have classroom cultures. In each of those cultures, each of those groups of people, what makes them a culture is the fact that they share a common language, they share common behaviors, all tied together by common values. So if you think about your family, you may have common languages with pet names for each other, ways to insult each other, words that no one else will understand but those people in your family. But the values and behaviors I always talk about is some families, you have to be at your dinner table at 6 o'clock, everybody eats together, everybody has to be there and you talk politely. Other families, they like to gather at 6 o'clock around the TV and everyone watches their favorite show on Netflix or wherever. And so one is not a better family behavior than another. They just emphasize two different family values. Some family values are really about, let's get together on the table. We need a time where we communicate with each other. And so we need to learn how to communicate honestly. While others say, you know what, as a family, it's really important that you have a safe space for yourself where you can just relax and enjoy our time. And we do that by watching TV together. One value is not better than the other, but they're different ways of putting a cultural value of that family into place. So what are some examples of cultures you belong to? So this is the part that you put on the culture. What other cultures? So we talk about religious cultures, we talk about maybe sports cultures, but as teachers, work cultures, classroom cultures. So school is a culture, what else? You're right, our school most definitely creates, the principal creates that school environment. What other cultures are we part of? Teaching artist cultures, reading cultures, yes, I love that. Your department most definitely creates a culture within. As we think about educators, we're going to want to be a little more specific. What group of people are you thinking about? And so that's where it's really helpful to think about which exactly educating culture. Is it through a particular website? Are there a group of people that you regularly come into contact with? So Same thing as you think about librarian literacy culture. Is there an organization you belong to? Is there an ethnic studies organization you want to create? Generational cultures, but you want to definitely also think about what are those groups of people that you regularly get along with. So there is a MAC culture out there. So yes, the school cultures and peer cultures. Does anyone have time to have friends? What are friends? What are that? What? Is there anyone else out there? So yes, that's also an important one for them. As you think about that, though, then you want to start thinking about what is the language you use in your school cultures? What are the behaviors that you use in those school cultures? So let's be specific. In my family, right, I have actually 2 or 3 different family cultures. I am Chris, I am Crisito, and I am Cris. I am Chris to the general population. To my parents, I am Crisito. And to my wife and to my children, I can be Cris, right? 3 different ways of using language in my family. Do you have any pet names? How is language used? I can most definitely think about Marvels having specific language. I can think of millennial language. Are there any particular social networks you belong to that have specific language? What does social media do for culture? Is there such a thing as social media culture, and are there behaviors for social media culture? So what are the behaviors? So I'm going to have different behaviors depending. I have teaching behaviors, what is considered normal teaching behavior. And then as a father, I certainly have disciplinary behavior. How do we show caring? What does caring look like in those different communities? So I know there are multiple multiple questions, but hopefully this is starting getting you to think the different ways. Eventually, what we want to do with this exercise is ask the question, why? How do I discipline my students? How do I discipline my children? Is that different? Yeah, my kids hate that. I don't know these people. Why do I have to give them a kiss? That's actually when we talk with families, we don't want to get into this. I'm looking at the time and I'm going to have to skip a whole lot of slides to get what's really the most important part. So I know a lot of you other are going to say, how are we going to get through these slides? But where I really want to model with this particular slide is this process of we start with the students, we get them to name their own cultures, we get them to come out, analyze it. Notice that we used a scaffold for those of you in ESL. Notice how we use that graphic organizer. We can start thinking about within that graphic organizer how we're using vocabulary and grammar and discourse and opportunities to share language. But the key thing is getting the students to share. So I'm sorry for a lot of y'all. We're going to be skipping through a lot of slides. Y'all can come back to this PowerPoint. But what's going to be really, really important for us to do is I need y'all to start talking about these culture and more importantly about cultural symbols. So thank you for sharing. But the key idea is that what we need to get out of our students is that their cultures are dynamic and that cultures is doing. Cultures is not memorizing, cultures is doing. And so in your classroom culture, you need to start asking them, what is the culture in our classroom? What do you want the culture to be? Do you want this to be a caring classroom culture? Do you want this to be a classroom culture to give me opportunity? Do you want this to be a classroom culture that is respectful? What does respect look like? So a lot of y'all do this in the first 2 weeks, but when you talk about what needs to happen in those first 6 weeks, are we going to be spotlighting the 2 or 3 people of color in our classroom culture? What does that feel like? Are we going to be all of us saying you're the only white person in my class and it's your fault everything that happens? How do we deal with those issues? So I'm going to have to move beyond ethnicity and race, but the main thing with race is going to be this is something that's forced upon our students. And then I'm going to quickly move into the use of cultural symbols as an example. So what I'm going to want us to do is really, Futa did a nice job of already talking about the importance of cultural symbols in art and this idea. So what I want to start doing is bring this whole idea of cultural symbols in art and how we would use this in a language experience approach lesson. And basically what we need to do is have introduced the idea of cultural symbols to the students as symbols that both allow us to reflect about our own cultures and to dialogue. So notice how in here in my planning, I made this linear as opposed to circular. It can move in between. For lesson planning, I find it helps to put this into a line. But in terms of my brain, language experience approach is really cyclical, but I need to put it into a line to really think about how I'm going to plan it out for my lesson. And so I really want to think about for my cultural symbols, is it more dialogic? Is it more about I wonder? Or is it about making connections? Or is it a combination of both? So I'm going to introduce a mural. This mural was created by youth at the Mexican American Cultural Center, the Caminos that they talked about. And what I want us to start thinking about is cultural identities, how students express themselves within multiple cultures. I think too often we just think about one culture, but it's really important that our students realize that they have multiple cultural identities across multiple peer cultures, family cultures, ethnic cultures, racial cultures, sports cultures, etc. This is Mexican American studies. So what does it mean for Mexican American identities? And we have a lot of debate. What does it mean to be Mexicano? What does it mean Mexican American? What does it mean to be Hispanic, Chicano? What does it mean to be Mexican American at home? How does TV portray? So there is no one identity. And so what the students did is they made this wonderful mural about all the different symbols of what it means to be and what they want it to be Mexican American in Austin. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that IC, and I'm going to focus on 2 questions. This whole idea of cultural symbols as connectors and cultural symbols as questions. So it's going to be these 2 questions that I'm going to ask you to put on the chat. This reminds me of, and a question I have is, and I'm going to give you the entire mural so you can see it. This was a portion, this was the one I had questions about. So for this one, I focus on what I call Radiohead and TV boy, is I see a boy with a TV on their head, and I wonder, what does this mean? I don't even know what question to ask. Does that mean that I'm a TV? Does that mean children's are TVs? So I'm going to share this big so you can see everything in this mural. And you can see this in the Learning Lab. And so this is where I'm going to first start, and I'm going to ask, you can go either. You can either go with, I connect to the person with the accordion because I remember when he passed away. So this was, what was his name? Does anyone remember his name?
Anthony Ortiz.
Anthony Ortiz. And I remember coming together and remembering his music. Very, very gifted accordion. So I connect to him, and basically sort of the unseen Latino music scene here in Austin. Or I wonder, I already told you, I wonder about TV head boy, TV head girl, TV head youth. So let's get those things. You know, I'm looking at this. I would rather actually have you do this in your groups. Let's not do this as a whole group. I really want to give you more time, and I'm concerned about time. So I'm gonna put this in our breakout groups. Actually, you've already done this once. I think y'all don't need me to model this, but you know that in a regular lesson we model this plenty, and then we need to get them in their small groups so they can interact. So I need to get y'all into your small groups to interact. There's two things that you're going to be doing in your small groups. I need to do a new share. So I'm gonna have to go back to the, yeah, sorry about that. I'm just looking at the time and saying, okay, what really you need a good 10 minutes to do this activity. So we need to give you those 10 minutes. You're going to be doing two things in your groups. One, you're going to draw your own symbol for your own mural. You're going to think about, I'm going to create a mural for my own cultural identity, and then I'm going to draw it. It does not have to be a great mural. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to, I don't know how to stop the share. So I'm going to tell you both things, and then I'll show you what I did. After 5 minutes, then you are going to respond to each other's symbols. So you're going to go around and you're going to either start with an "this reminds me of" or "I wonder." And so you cannot introduce your symbol. All you can do is show it to everybody else. So make it big. So I just want to let you know that it doesn't have to be I'm not an artist, right? And so just really quickly, this is the symbol I created. Y'all can see that. I made it big. Who knows what it means, but it uses stick figures. Questions about what I'm asking you to do? Draw a symbol of your cultural identity. Maybe you want to think about why we're all here together, or it could be another cultural identity you have or that's important to you. And then you're going to share it, and then you're going to respond to each other with those two sentences. Questions? All right. See you in 10 minutes. So we're back. I didn't realize I was muted. Sorry, everybody. We got about 5 minutes, right, Laura, before we get to the second break. So more than anything, what I want, there was never enough time. So we had the same issue. So in the time that we have, I think really what I want to get out of this is, what does this mean for our students, right? And start making connections to what this means for our students. What is that connection between actually being forced to draw and then putting yourself out there with making connections with the drawings other people didn't see? So we can, many of us did not got there, but this is sort of a group reflection on what's the importance of that experience piece, and then reflecting on that experience piece. And then you can talk about the activity itself. So volunteers for a group to start. What does this mean for your students?
I can start. I thought that this was a good way. It was frightening to have to think of what to share with others about my culture, but I really enjoyed the connections that I was able to make with the other group members. So I think that would be really helpful for students in the classroom too, to start building those connections between little bits of their cultures.
And building your classroom cultures, right? Yes. Specifically. So I think that's a wonderful way how our classroom cultures are collections of many, many different cultures. All right. Some other reflections on this particular piece.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead, Michael.
I came away from that conversation feeling more connected to the people in the breakout room across our personal cultures, because I was seeing myself reflected in their own representations. And I think that that's a good way to bring other people's cultures authentically into the classroom, and then use those to generate your own classroom culture that reflects all of those.
Definitely. So those dynamic cultures that we're really, really talking about, rather than the stereotypes that so often begin. So we have time for maybe one more.
I feel like it was important, the reflective component for both self-reflection and then reflection on others, because the assignment to draw something reflective of your own culture and then to look at others, I feel like it's a twofer. you get both.
Right, and I think that is I think what is key of the language experience approach is making sure that that reflective component happens. We're not going to get to the challenges, but I think this is something that we're gonna certainly think about, is what does this mean for STAR, and what does this mean for oppressed cultures? We didn't get there. That's the difficult, right? And I think Michael was starting to get there in terms of assumptions, stereotypes. And then what is about for those students who don't like to share? We have some very, very passive students. So those are some questions I'm going to leave people with, and going through the process. Where I'm going to really talk about, though, is that cultural identity symbols are dynamically interpreted, and that social power dynamics matter, and that it is in our cultural communities that it is important for us to start to have these communities, and we can express ourselves in multiple ways. And that is what our job as teachers is to help students start to facilitate and express really the complexities of what it means to be in the society.